Do you remember the first time you watched Atlanta and felt like the show knew something about you that you hadn't told it yet? Like you're watching the show and on paper it's a comedy, and then there's a scene where there's an alligator in the room,
Don't go in there, the alligator's in there.
What? Vibes.
or a black Justin Bieber.
Shit, it's Justin Bieber.
I don't like this nigga.
You don't reach for your phone to Google what does this mean. You just sit with it because somehow, deep down, you already know what it is. That's the thing about Atlanta that I think gets underrated when people talk about it. They call it surreal, they call it genre defying, they call it weird. All of these things are true, but none of them are precise enough. What Donald Glover made, what him and his team of writers, producers, and directors built across 4 seasons, is one of the most fully realized examples of a very specific artistic tradition. One that has its own name, its own history, its own set of rules, and its own intentions. It's called Afrosurrealism. And today, 10 years after Atlanta first aired, 10 years after N. Marks showed up to his cousin's rap show with nowhere to sleep and no real plan, I just want to sit with this show properly. I want to understand what it was actually doing, not just appreciate it, but to try to understand it. Because here's what I think: Atlanta didn't just make good television, it made an argument, a philosophical, aesthetical, and political argument about what it means to be black in America, told through a lens that refuses to be comfortable, refuses to be fully explained, and refuses to give you the neat emotional payoff you think you are owed. And that argument is still ongoing. You can feel it in the Vince Staples show, you can feel it in Sorry to Bother You can feel it in Get Out and in Us. You can also feel it in Mr. and Mrs. Smith. But first, we need to go back to the source. Not Atlanta, but further back. We need to understand where Afro-surrealism actually comes from, because it didn't start with Donald Glover. It started with questions black artists have been asking for a very long time. What do you do when the real world is already surreal?
So weird.
Great party. Let's
So weird. This is a weird place.
The term Afro-surrealism has been around for a while, and the most important recent text on it, the one that I keep coming back to, is Rochelle Spencer's book Afro-surrealism, the African Diaspora Surrealist Fiction. And if you haven't read it, I think it will change how you read and watch everything. Spencer traces the tradition across literature, visual art, music, and she makes this really good argument that Afro-surrealism isn't just black people doing surrealism. It's not like what if Dali was from Atlanta. It's more specific and more politically grounded than that. She draws a distinction that I think is very crucial. In the European surrealism, there's Salvador Dali, Margaret, and Brenton. The movement, European surrealism, was at its core about escape. It was about breaking free from rationalism, from the bourgeois logic, from the constraints of waking reality. The dream world was a liberation from the everyday. But for black artists, surrealism wasn't an escape from everyday reality, it was a kind of a description of it. Spencer writes about how the condition of being part of the African diaspora, living in a world that was built to misrepresent you, exploit you, and then gaslight you about both, that condition is actually already surreal. The reality black people have to navigate daily already contain contradictions that shouldn't coexist. It already contains logics that doesn't hold. It contains moments that feels like dreams or nightmares, but it's just Tuesday. So when black artists bend realities in their works, they are not escaping from the black experience, they are actually accurately depicting it. And this goes way back. Spencer traces it through the Harlem Renaissance, through the works of Zora Neale Hurston, who was bending folklore and the uncanny long before it was commonly known, through Sun Ra, who showed up to jazz clubs claiming to be from Saturn, not as a joke but as a kind of cosmic refusal to be identified or defined by the American categorization of blackness, through Ishmael Reed's Mumbo Jumbo, through Samuel Delany, Octavia Butler, and the whole Afrofuturism tradition, which overlaps with Afro-surrealism but isn't quite the same thing. Afrofuturism is about reclaiming space in the future, while Afro-surrealism is about letting the present not be flattened. Afro-surrealism has a relationship with violence that European surrealism doesn't. In the black tradition, the dream logic isn't whimsical, it lives right next to genuine danger. The absurd and the fatal coexist. You can be laughing and then the air shifts and you suddenly feel something underneath you that's very cold and very real. If that sounds familiar, that's Atlanta in a sentence. Think about the very first scene Atlanta opens up with. They are outside waiting to get into the club and then there's an altercation, and within 2 minutes we hear gunshots. That first episode also closes with the same scene and we see Earn and Paperboy on the news. The show doesn't tell you how to feel about that. It doesn't bracket it as the dangerous part. It just puts it in the same tonal register as everything else, as if to say, this is all mundane. It's all the same world. The absurdity, the violence, the mundane, it's all one thing. That's the Afro-surrealist move. What's strange about Atlanta, and I mean strange in a good way, is that these surrealist moments are not the point of the show. They're not even the most interesting parts of the show. They are just there. Because the show at its core is a realist drama between two cousins trying to figure out their lives. On one hand, you have Earn, who is an overeducated, under-resourced cousin who is also too proud to fully admit how much he needs Alfred, that's Paperboy. And then Paperboy on the other end is an up-and-coming rapper who is trying to move on from being a local rapper to something bigger. These are real concerns, human concerns, but the world around them doesn't follow the same rules we expect. Darius just moves through the world with the authority that he understands something that everybody else doesn't. And Darius as a character is the most Afro-surrealist character in the entire show. He is the most explicitly Afro-surrealist figure in the whole show. He is not confused by the world's contradictions. He's already integrated them. He says things that sound insane and then are later revealed to be completely true. He is present with animals in a way that feels completely spiritual and natural at the same time. He sort of exists outside of regular time. In Spencer's framework, this is a recognizable archetype, the figure who has already adjusted to the surreal nature of black life, who has sort of found peace, not through denial, but through the acceptance of the contradictions that present themselves. If you compare that to Earn is trying to use rational tools in an irrational world. He went to Princeton, he thinks in terms of plans and leverage and long games, and the show is in parts about how those tools, the tools of meritocracy, of white institutional logic, keep failing him, not because he's using them wrong, but because the world he's operating in doesn't recognize them as valid currency. Then there's that brilliant episode which follows Van, Earn's on and off girlfriend, and she has this perfect job as a teacher, and one random decision cascades into nearly losing everything. The cause and effect are so disproportionate it feels like a nightmare, because it is. Because that's what the precarity of black professional life actually feels like from the inside. One wrong move and the scaffolding collapses. Spencer talks about this in her book. She talks about how Afro-surrealist fiction often depicts systems of logic, legal systems, economic systems, professional systems, as fundamentally illegible to the black characters navigating them. Not because these characters are incompetent, but because these systems were never designed with them in mind, and yet they are still expected to perform as if they were. The rules are real and enforced, but they weren't written for you and they don't protect you. And when you ask someone to explain why, they change the subject. That is not a metaphor for surreal, that is the surreal. Season 2 of Atlanta, Robin's season, is the show at the height of its powers, I think. The reason is that it commits completely to the Afro-surrealistic approach. It doesn't toggle between realism and weirdness. It finds frequency where those are the same thing, and it stays there for the entire season. Teddy Perkins is a 40-minute episode where Darius goes to pick up a vintage piano from a decaying mansion and meets a man named Teddy Perkins, played by Donald Glover in a pale makeup and prosthetic face, who is a clear reference to Michael Jackson, to the Jackson family, to what childhood trauma and industrial abuse does to a black man over decades. The episode is shot like a horror film, it plays like a horror film. There are no jokes, and yet it's also about music, about fathers, about what it costs to be exceptional as a black child in America, and about the way that cost compounds across a lifetime.
Wait.
Here's what gets me about that episode. It's completely, absolutely grounded in reality. Nothing happens that is actually impossible, and yet the whole thing feels like a dream because the emotional logic of it, the way grief and ego and genius and damage all live in the same body, that is not a thing our normal storytelling grammar can hold. Afrosurrealism can hold it. Then there's the barber shop, which is just Alfred getting a haircut, and his barber is a conspiracy theorist, and they talk for the whole episode, and somehow by the end of it, you have a complete portrait of a kind of black male interior life, the paranoia, the fatalism, the humor, the genuine love for community, the exhaustion that most shows would need a whole season to build. The barbershop in the black cultural imagination is already a surreal space. It's a place outside of time, a place with its own epistemology, its own truth-telling protocols, its own relationship to fact, humor, and myth. Atlanta understands this. It uses the barbershop as what it is. If we look at the wider ecosystem for a minute, Atlanta didn't emerge from nowhere, and it didn't stay contained. In the mid-2010s through the early 2020s were these remarkable moments where Afrosurrealism as a mode had a kind of cultural breakthrough. Multiple works from multiple creators using this lens in overlapping and complementary ways. Jordan Peele's Get Out is on the surface a horror movie, and it's genuinely scary, but what makes it brilliant is that it's operating on the Afrosurrealist principle that the horror isn't imported from somewhere else. It's already here, it's already in the room, it's already in the dinner party conversation. It's already in the microaggression that the white girlfriend's dad delivers with a smile. The twist in Get Out, the coagular procedure, the sunken place, isn't really a twist, it's a literalization. The sunken place is what it feels like to be the only black person in a certain room and everyone is performing allyship at you, while you become increasingly unable to speak your actual experience. He'll take the psychological reality of that experience and gives it a body, gives it a mechanism, gives it a visual grammar. That's Afrosurrealism, that's Spencer's framework in action. Taking the surreality that is already emotionally true and making it visually and narratively concrete. But for my money, the most surrealist movie of that era has to be Sorry to Bother You. The premise, Cash Green discovers he can succeed as a telemarketer by using his white voice.
Let me give you a tip. Use your white voice.
That is already operating in the surreal, and then the movie just keeps escalating. By the third act, there are horse people, literally human beings being genetically modified with horse DNA to be more productive workers. And the thing is, that escalation doesn't feel like a gear change, it feels inevitable because Riley is following a very specific emotional and political logic. The transformation of human beings into labor-optimized creatures is not a metaphor. It's already happening. The horse people are just the honest version of what capitalism actually requires. The comedy and the horror exist completely. You are laughing at things that are genuinely frightening, and the film doesn't help you adjudicate between these responses. Both are correct. The tonal coexistence, the refusal to separate the funny from the frightening, is something Atlanta mastered on television, and you can see this works in dialogues with each other. I also spent some time watching Mr. and Mrs. Smith because I think it's underrated as an Afro-surrealist text, and it's also interesting because it represents Glover returning to something, coming back to a set of concerns from Atlanta with a different tool, a different form, a different genre, a different framework. On the surface, Mr. and Mrs. Smith is a spy thriller. Two strangers are paired as married covers for a mysterious organization. They do missions, they blow up stuff. There's entire chemistry between them, but the show really is about the performance of intimacy, about two people trying to construct a relationship, a real one with real feelings inside a framework that is fundamentally false. Their whole marriage is a mission. Their whole domestic life is a cover story. And the surreal logic of the show, the mission that escalates in strange, dreamlike ways, the bosses who are only ever text messages, the clients and targets who feel like characters from a fable, all of that creates this context where the real emotional drama becomes more exposed, not less. Because when the external world is clearly artificial, the only authentic thing left is how two people feel about each other. The surrealism strips away all of the noise. The Vince Staples show also does something that I think is in direct correlation with Atlanta, where Atlanta often moves through dramatic escalation, scenes that begin in one register and end completely somewhere different. The Vince Staples show takes an almost opposite approach.
Can we help you?
Yes, I was racially profiled by a nigga in the gift shop.
things happen sort of and then they stop, and Vince observes it with all his expressions that communicate exactly nothing. It's extremely funny, and the humor works precisely because of that blankness, because Vince as a character has clearly decided that the world does not merit the expenditure of emotional reaction, not because he doesn't feel things, but because he's already long past being surprised by how weird and arbitrary everything is. There's this recurring quality in Afrosurrealist work. Spencer calls it something like a kind of an ontological cool. It stands that isn't detachment exactly, but a refusal to perform astonishment at things that should probably be astonishing, because the people who perform astonishments at the strange things that happen in black life are usually the people for whom this life is a novelty. For the people living it, it's just what happens. It's just Tuesday. Vince Staples as the narrator has this quality in an almost pure form. He's moved past the point where he thinks any of this is unusual, and the show uses that quality to make observations about Long Beach. The ending of Atlanta divided people. Some felt it was too abstract, too withholding, too much of a dream and not enough of a resolution, and I think those criticisms are right, but also in a way wrong. The show ends, and spoilers if you haven't finished it, Earn achieves something like a success, but the success feels strange. It feels hollow in a way that is hard to name. The things he was chasing has arrived, and it doesn't feel like what he thought it would. And Alfred by the end has a similar reckoning. He got what he wanted professionally, and the world around him has shifted in ways that make him getting that feel complicated. The show doesn't tell you whether this is triumph or loss. It puts you in the experience of both simultaneously. That is again the Afro-surrealist move. Spencer is very clear about this in her book. The tradition does not traffic in redemption arcs in the conventional sense. The idea that suffering will eventually resolve into meaning and the dream logic will eventually make sense, that the hero will get what they deserve, those are the promises of a different kind of story, a story that believes in the fundamental fairness of the universe. Afro-surrealism doesn't believe that. It believes that the universe is indifferent and strange, and that the work is able to find beauty and meaning and connection anyway, not because it resolves, but despite the fact that it doesn't. The show ends in a way life ends a chapter, ambiguously, with the sense that everything is still in motion, and motion doesn't have a predetermined destination. Some people find that very unsatisfying. I, on the other hand, find it to be very honest. I keep coming back to the Alligator Man episode, where Earn goes to save his uncle from himself, and in the house, there's an alligator that's just there, and has always been there since Earn was staying there years ago. The alligator doesn't linger, it's just there, and it comes out for a moment, and then it lays back down, and the episode continues basically. I often think about what a different show would do to that moment, how it would feel a need to explain it, to contextualize it, to justify it, or to make a joke out of it. Atlanta just lets it be. And to me, that is the heart of the whole thing. The willingness to put something out into the world that doesn't ask for your permission to be there. Something that exists in the same frame as everything else. The bills, the rap career, the mixed connections, the broken relationship, without needing to be made sense of. The alligator is real. The alligator is surreal. The alligator is what it is. An alligator. That's Atlanta. That's Afro-surrealism. That's 10 years of a show that decided that black life was interesting enough, complicated enough, worthy enough to be depicted in its full strangeness. And it turned out to be right. Okay, that's the end. If you enjoyed this and you want to go any deeper, I would recommend Rochelle Spencer's book, Afro-surrealism. And if you'd like to binge watch some of this, I would recommend Us, Get Out, Sorry to Bother You, Atlanta, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Tell me some of your favorite scenes from Atlanta that lives rent-free in your head. I'd like to hear them. Subscribe. I'll catch you in the next one.